I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez. Emergency medicine is chaos wrapped in purpose, and I live for it. But that night our hospital's annual fundraising gala wasn't about purpose, it was about prestige. Candlelight shimmered off the crystal glasses, designer gowns swept the marble floors, and I tried to remember how to breathe in the tight black dress Daniel picked out. I was supposed to feel proud. Instead, I felt like an extra in a play my mother-in-law wrote, produced, and directed. Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, Chief of Surgery, board member, matriarch of the Rhodes medical dynasty, and my husband's biggest fan. The clink of champagne flutes and murmured small talk filled the ballroom. I was in mid-conversation with a neurologist I'd just met, explaining the ER's new triage protocol, when Evelyn drifted over like an expensive ghost, wearing her signature pearls and disdain. "Sarah," she cooed, her voice just loud enough to command attention. "Still working in emergency medicine? That must be so taxing." My smile faltered, but I held it like a scalpel. "It's challenging, yes, but rewarding." Evelyn tilted her head with faux sympathy, as though I'd just confessed to a tragic addiction. "It's practically social work, isn't it? Triage for addicts and street drunks. But I suppose someone has to do it." The table laughed. Daniel didn't. He didn't do anything. Not a word, not a hand on my back, not a simple, "That's enough, Mom." He just took another sip of wine and avoided my eyes like I was the one who'd said something shameful. I stared at him, waiting, hoping. He adjusted his cufflinks. That moment that silence was louder than Evelyn's insult. Louder than the laughter around me. Louder than the jazz quartet playing Cole Porter near the bar. I excused myself before my rage melted the crystal stemware in my hand. In the ladies' room, I leaned against the marble counter and looked at myself in the mirror. Red lips, straight spine, a woman who saved lives on no sleep and burnt coffee. Who pulled children from wrecked cars and intubated overdoses in parking lots, and yet here I was, made to feel like a second-tier medical mascot because I didn't cut people open for a living. My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. I smiled instead. Wide, sharp. Because I'd just realized something. They thought I belonged in that ballroom, that if they shined me up enough, I'd play the part. But I never did. And tonight, Evelyn made it clear I never would. I left the gala early, blaming a patient call. Daniel didn't come after me, not even a text. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a drink. Then I saw a tucked under a pile of unopened Mela glossy brochure with bold blue letters. Doctors Without Borders. A breath caught in my throat. Maybe it wasn't an accident it found me tonight. Because something was about to change. And I wasn't asking permission. There's a scar just under my ribs, left from a gang member's switchblade 2 years ago. He was high, delusional, bleeding out, and I saved his life anyway. That's the kind of doctor I am. It's the kind of doctor I always wanted to be, but somehow, somewhere along the way, I became the wrong kind of doctor for the people around me. After the gala, I couldn't stop replaying Evelyn's words. Triage for addicts and street drunks. That wasn't just a jab, it was a thesis statement. Her entire belief system summed up in one snide line. And Daniel, God, he just sat there, my own husband, my teammate, my supposed other half. I married into a dynasty, and that sounded more romantic than it turned out to be. The Rhodes family is medicine royalty, surgeons, researchers, legacy hires at the best hospitals in the country. At dinners they speak in acronyms and accolades. I used to try to keep up. Now, I just keep quiet. Daniel was different once. He used to love that I didn't want to be like his mother, said my fire kept him sane, but as he climbed higher he changed, smoothed the rough edges. Started flinching when I used words like overdose or knife wound at charity events. I still remember my med school graduation. I'd just been named valedictorian. Evelyn pulled me aside, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, with your scores, you could still transfer into a real specialty, surgery, maybe." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Stay in your lane, and it better be one that shines. I thought I could earn her respect over time. I thought Daniel would always back me, even if his mother didn't. But I was wrong. Back then, I still believed marriage was supposed to make you feel more seen, more anchored, but all it did was push me further into the shadows of someone else's spotlight. Every time Evelyn introduced me as Daniel's wife, Sarah, instead of Dr. Martinez, I felt something inside me retract, shrivel. Tonight, that something broke. I sat on the couch in my scrubs, still not changed from my shift earlier. I hadn't even taken off my badge. It felt like a shield against the cold inside our apartment. I pulled the brochure from under the mail and opened it. Be where you are needed most. There was a photo of a field tent, a patient on a stretcher, a woman wearing a stethoscope around her neck, and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen in my own reflection for years. Passion. Purpose. A reminder that medicine is not about prestige, it's about people. I ran my fingers across the page. Something stirred in my chest, something I thought was long dead. Hope. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a world outside this one, a place where the work was messy and vital, where patients didn't care if you were a Rhodes or a Martinez, they just wanted to live. And I knew that something had to give. Because I wasn't going to fade politely into someone else's legacy. I had my own to write. The next morning, I arrived at work before the sun rose, a coffee in one hand and that brochure in the other. The waiting room was already buzzing, a teenager cradling his broken wrist. An elderly woman coughing so hard her shoulders shook, a man in withdrawal pacing near the vending machine. This was my world, loud, flawed, human. And for all its grit, I belonged here in a way I never had in that marble-floored gala. But something had shifted. The pamphlet was folded neatly in my coat pocket like a secret. All day I kept touching it absent-mindedly, like it might catch fire. A placenta migrant worker with a crushed hand noticed me staring at it between stitches. They need good ones, he said, nodding toward it. People who care. His voice was rough, accented, sincere. I smiled, but inside, something cracked open. I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. When I got home that night, Daniel was at the kitchen island, hunched over his laptop, headset on. I dropped my keys into the bowl, quietly enough not to break whatever conference call spell he was under. He finished with a clipped, "We'll circle back tomorrow," and looked up. "Long day?" he asked without looking at me, already refocusing on his screen. "Busy," I said. Then, after a pause, "I saw something today." I reached into my coat pocket and placed the brochure on the counter between us. He glanced at it once, then went back to typing. "Doctors Without Borders," he said flatly. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it." Silence. "You're not serious." "I might be." He snorted, finally turning to face me. "Sarah, come on, you work in a trauma unit in the middle of the city. Isn't that enough chaos for you?" "It's not about chaos, it's about meaning." He leaned back in his chair. "Meaning, you save lives here. You have a stable job, a reputation. We're building something." "No," I said quietly. "You're building something. I'm just following behind, sweeping up." His jaw clenched. "This is ridiculous. You're upset about the gala. You're making a whole thing out of one comment." My stomach dropped. One comment? You mean when your mother mocked my entire career in front of a room full of people and you said nothing? His face softened, but only slightly. "She was out of line, but she's old school, that's just how she is." "No, that's how you let her be." I waited, for an apology, for acknowledgement, for anything. He offered none. Instead, he slid the brochure back toward me. "You're not going to actually apply for this. You'd be throwing away everything we've built." I looked down at it. The woman on the cover was still there, still steady-eyed, still fearless. "I think I already have." I didn't say another word, just picked up the brochure and walked out of the room. That night, after Daniel went to bed, I opened my laptop and started the application. Dinner was roasted salmon, some kind of quinoa salad, and tension so thick I could have sliced it with a scalpel. Evelyn had arranged the whole thing, claiming she wanted a casual family evening. Casual, of course, meaning catered. She didn't cook, she orchestrated. Daniel sat to my right, sipping wine like it was anesthesia. Evelyn, across from me, poured herself a second glass and smiled with that rehearsed warmth that made my skin crawl. "So," she said, eyes glittering. "I spoke with the board this afternoon. The hospital is forming a new committee for community outreach. They're looking for someone young, charismatic, female. I thought of you." I blinked. "Outreach?" "Yes," she said, like it was obvious. "It's perfect. You'd represent the hospital at civic events, coordinate health fairs, very meaningful work." I looked at Daniel, expecting him to intervene. He just buttered his roll. "I'm not sure I'm the right fit," I said carefully. "I'm still doing full-time ER shifts." "Oh, but this wouldn't interfere," Evelyn said smoothly. "It's only a few hours a month, and it's a nice stepping stone. I mean, you're not going to stay in emergency medicine forever." There it was. That tiny polished dagger. "I might," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "I like what I do." Evelyn sipped her wine. "Of course, it's admirable, but eventually you'll want something with impact." I set my fork down. I have impact every day. When someone comes in with a bullet in their chest or a baby not breathing, what I do matters. Daniel chuckled under his breath, not unkindly, but patronizing. "No one's saying it doesn't matter, Sarah, but long-term, outreach could be more strategic, better optics." "Optics?" His face changed. "I just meant—" "No," I said, pushing back from the table. "You meant exactly what you said." Evelyn reached across and touched my hand like she was patting a child. "Sweetheart, we're trying to help guide you." "No," I said, "you're trying to control me." I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I didn't care. "You know what I did today?" I sewed a man's face back together. He got slashed with a box cutter trying to protect a woman from being mugged. He didn't care where I went to school or if I sit on hospital boards. He just needed someone who could hold a needle steady. They were both silent. Good. I leaned forward slightly. "And for the record, I don't need guiding, I need respect." I left the table. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't cry in the car. I drove straight to the hospital and picked up an extra shift. 12 hours, 4 traumas, 1 successful intubation on a toddler. When my hands were covered in blood and my mind focused on saving lives, no one cared about last names or surgical legacies. They just called me doctor. And that was enough. The application form sat on my screen, blinking cursor like a dare. Country preferences, languages spoken, trauma experience. I answered each question with practiced precision. Years in emergency medicine? 7. Pediatric exposure? Daily. Surgical improvisation? More times than I could count. By the time I finished, my pulse had steadied. My hands had not. It wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. I didn't tell Daniel, not yet. Not because I was hiding it, but because I needed to feel it was mine first. For once, something that wasn't molded by Rhodes' family expectations or dissected over Evelyn's dinner table. I poured everything into my letter of intent. My voice, my fire. I wrote about the girl who chose emergency medicine because she wanted to run toward chaos when others ran away. About the woman who now needed to remember what that choice felt like before her life got reduced to wine pairings and networking dinners. I told them the truth, that I wanted to matter again. Not in headlines or handshakes, but in the real places where life teetered on the edge and the only thing between survival and surrender was a heartbeat and steady hands. I hit submit. That night I worked a double. I stitched up a biker who went headfirst into a parked truck, calmed a mother who brought in her blue-lipped toddler, resuscitated an elderly man after a cardiac arrest in the waiting room. The kind of night that left your bones aching and your soul humming. The kind of night that reminded me why I chose this life. When I got home, Daniel was already asleep. The apartment was too quiet. sterile, like a hotel suite staged to impress buyers. His shoes were perfectly aligned by the door, his keys in their little silver tray, his lab coat hanging just so. I stood there, still in bloodied scrubs, my fingers trembling slightly, wondering how we got here. I used to walk in from shifts and he'd ask for stories. Now he just checked if I'd washed up before touching the furniture. In our bedroom, his breathing was slow and even. I watched him for a moment, beautiful, composed, oblivious. Then I took a hot shower, scrubbed away blood and doubt. And when I slipped into bed beside him, I didn't feel like his wife. I felt like someone on the edge of something massive. And I knew, in the marrow of my bones, that if I stayed too long in this house, in this life, I'd forget who I was before Evelyn's polished disdain and Daniel's quiet compliance. The application was sent. No turning back now. And honestly, I didn't want to. I found out the way you find out the worst things slowly, and all at once. It started with Daniel cleaning up after dinner, humming like nothing in our world was shifting. I was still riding the afterglow of defiance, of putting my own dream first. My fingers grazed the edge of the table, the memory of that submit button still fresh in my skin. "You've been quiet lately," he said, not looking up from the dishes. "I applied," I said. He paused, water running, soap bubbles frozen mid-motion. "For what?" "For Doctors Without Borders." There was a beat of silence, just water running, humming stopped. "You're kidding." I turned toward him. "No, I sent in my application last night." He laughed. Actually, laughed. Not loud, just that sharp little exhale he used when patients asked if ER docs were real doctors. "You're serious." "I am." He shut off the faucet, turned, and leaned against the counter like he was preparing for a deposition. "This is about my mother, isn't it?" "No," I said, "it's about me." Daniel crossed his arms. "You're overreacting. You're taking one bad night and turning it into a career crisis." I blinked. "One bad night? You watched your mother publicly insult me and said nothing." "She was being dramatic," he said with a shrug. "It's what she does." "And you let her?" He sighed. "Sarah, come on, be reasonable, you're emotional." There it was, that word, emotional, always lobbed like a diagnosis when I started to assert myself. "I'm not emotional, I'm done." He tilted his head. "Done with what, this marriage?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No. Done letting your family define what my career should look like." "So what, you're going to run off to the jungle and deliver babies in a tent? That's not real medicine." That hit harder than I expected. I stepped closer. "That is real medicine. It's the most real kind there is, and maybe I need to remember what it feels like." He watched me, something flickering behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or just ego. Then he softened, too quickly. "Look," he said gently, "I talked to Mom. She's pulling some strings for a new position on the hospital board. It's got visibility, influence. You'd be working with some incredible people." I felt the manipulation like a hand on the back of my neck. "I already work with incredible people," I said. "People who don't care about boardrooms or last names. People who just want to live." He stepped forward. "Don't do this." "I already did." He stared at me, his face finally cracking. And then, the coup de grace, Evelyn showed up. She didn't knock, just walked in like she still owned the air in our lungs. "I heard about your little adventure," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "Not an adventure," I said, "a decision." "Running away isn't noble," she said. "It's cowardly." I met her eyes. "Staying silent while watching people rot is cowardly." She flushed. "This is a mistake, you'll regret it." I didn't blink. "Maybe, but I'll regret it a lot less than sitting here pretending your approval is oxygen." She opened her mouth, closed it. Daniel looked between us, completely out of his depth. "Sarah." I grabbed my keys. For once, I'm choosing my patience. And I walked out. Not just from the apartment. From the whole performance. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in a hotel room 3 blocks from the hospital, the acceptance email open on my phone like a beacon. It was simple, direct. "We are pleased to inform you," but to me, it felt like a lifeline thrown into the storm I'd been treading in for years. The next morning, I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't need to. I walked back into our apartment just after sunrise. Daniel was at the kitchen table, still in his robe, scrolling on his phone like nothing had changed, but everything had. I dropped the letter on the table in front of him. Paper, not digital. I wanted him to feel it. He glanced at it, read the header, his brow furrowed. "They accepted you?" I nodded once, yes. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose like it was a joke he'd heard before. "Okay, so now what? You gloat for a minute and then we get back to reality?" I didn't answer. He waited, then laughed quietly, that same cold, amused sound. "You're not going." "I leave in 3 weeks. His face didn't change immediately. He just stared at me, like I'd said something in a foreign language. "You're actually going?" His voice was flat, controlled. "Yes. Sarah, this isn't a sabbatical, this isn't a yoga retreat, this is war zones and refugee camps. You really think you're ready for that?" I stepped forward. "I've been in ERs where the floor is slick with blood and we're out of ventilators. I've intubated kids on sidewalks and done compressions in parking garages. I think I'll manage." He stood now. "So you're just going to walk away, from this life, from me?" I tilted my head. "From a life where I have to beg to be respected? From a marriage where my dreams are treated like distractions? Yes." His hands clenched at his sides. "You're being reckless." "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally being honest." He stared at me for a long moment, something behind his eyes unraveling. Maybe the image of the wife who stayed in her lane, who played nice at fundraisers, who politely accepted being benched in her own career. That woman was gone. I grabbed my duffel bag from the couch. "Don't do this," he said one last time, quieter now. I paused at the door. "You had every chance to stand with me. You chose to stand behind them instead." And then I left. Not with a dramatic slam or a tearful glance back, just the quiet, steady click of the lock behind me. The acceptance letter was still on the table. Let him read it again. Let him understand. I wasn't bluffing. I was already gone. I packed fast, not frantic, just efficient. My apartment technically ours until I figured out the paperwork was still pristine, everything still exactly as Evelyn would approve. I didn't take much. Scrubs, field boots, med kits I'd quietly bought online weeks ago. I left behind the cocktail dresses, the jewelry Daniel liked when we played hospital power couple, and every single cardigan Evelyn had gifted me to look more professional. I was folding my stethoscope when the knock came. I didn't answer right away. A second knock, sharper, then the voice I'd memorized years ago. "Sarah, open the door." "Evelyn." I opened it. She looked furious. Impeccably dressed in soft gray silk and that same pearl necklace she wore the night she publicly sliced me open at the gala. "You're making a scene," she said. "No," I replied, "I'm making a choice." She stepped inside without waiting, surveyed the half-filled suitcase like it offended her. "Do you have any idea how foolish this is? Walking out in the middle of your career, abandoning your marriage?" "My marriage abandoned me." "You're his wife." "No, I'm a doctor. I'm a human being. And I'm tired of pretending your approval is a career milestone." She stiffened. "This isn't how Rhodes women behave." "I'm not a Rhodes woman," I said. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I stitched a man's artery with a broken clamp last week. I've cracked ribs doing compressions. I've saved lives you wouldn't even let past the lobby." She opened her mouth, then shut it. Her eyes, usually sharp, calculating, were suddenly just old, tired. "You're being selfish." That word landed, not because it hurt, but because it sounded so familiar. Daniel had used it too. "I've spent years letting you measure me against a ruler I never agreed to," I said. "Surgery, status, control. That's your language, not mine. She scoffed. And what, running off to some refugee camp makes you noble? No, but it makes me free. Evelyn stepped back. If you walk out that door, don't expect to walk back in. I looked her dead in the eyes. I'm not walking out, I'm walking toward. And I zipped the suitcase shut. She left without another word. Daniel didn't show up. No dramatic goodbyes, no airport chases, just silence. That suited me fine. The car came at dawn. I sat in the back, hands steady on my lap as the city blurred past the windows. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was momentum. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission. I had chosen this. And I wasn't going back. Dust, heat, noise, the kind of chaos that would paralyze most people, but not me, not here. I stepped off the transport truck and into a different world. The refugee camp sprawled across a barren stretch of desert, a maze of canvas tents, rusted shipping containers turned into makeshift clinics, and thin bodies moving in quick, determined rhythms. No marble floors, no nameplates, no pretense. Just need. A woman in a red scarf waved me toward the intake tent. Her name was Dr. Amina Yusuf, pediatrician, triage lead, and instantly the most competent person I'd ever met. She gave me a quick nod and handed me a clipboard already smudged with blood. You Martinez? Yes. Good. You're with me. That was it. No hazing, no snide questions about where I trained, just immediate trust based on presence and purpose. Within minutes, I was stitching up a child with a leg torn open by barbed wire. 20 minutes later, I was administering IV fluids to a pregnant woman who had walked 12 miles in 90-degree heat. By the end of the day, I'd resuscitated a dehydrated boy, treated a bullet wound, and helped deliver a breech baby on a cot with one working lamp. No one asked what board I served on. No one cared what name was embroidered on my coat. Here, you were what you did, not what you wore, or who you married, or which hospital wing bore your family name. It was brutal, beautiful, honest. And I had never felt more alive. That first night, I sat outside the clinic tent on a folding chair, hands still stained with iodine, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. Dr. Amina handed me a canteen and dropped into the chair beside me. You did good, she said simply. Thank you. She looked at me. You're one of those types, huh? High-functioning burnout cases who come here looking for redemption. I smiled. Something like that. She nodded like she saw it all the time. This place doesn't fix people, Sarah. It shows them who they've been pretending not to be. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Back home, I was always defending my value. Here, I didn't have to explain it. I just had to show up. The blood, the dust, the noise, it didn't scare me. It centered me. This wasn't some noble sacrifice. This was me, without apology, without the weight of Rhodes' expectations draped around my shoulders like a lead apron. That night, I slept on a cot with a thin mattress and a mosquito net that kept falling down, and I slept better than I had in years. Because here, even in the dirt, I stood tall. And every heartbeat I steadied, every breath I gave back, reminded me. I was never meant to be silent. I was meant to matter. It was 2 weeks before I heard from Daniel again. The message came late, slipped into my inbox like a ghost. No subject line, just 4 words. I'm proud of you. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it moved me, but because it almost did. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't ownership. It was the kind of thing you say when you're not sure what else is safe to say. And I recognized the tone distant, curated, self-serving. Daniel had always been good at performing the right emotions with just enough sincerity to keep you from questioning his loyalty. I didn't respond. The next day, while I was cleaning and rebandaging a young boy's infected leg, Amina looked over at me. You good? Yeah, just. Someone from home reached out. She nodded, not pushing. Later, as we boiled instruments over a camp stove, your sterilizer having broken down again, she asked, "You thinking about going back?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I said. "He says he's proud of me." Amina raised an eyebrow. "Was he proud when you gave up your career for his dinner parties? When his mother spat on your job and he smiled through it?" I smiled, tired. "You've been listening." "I don't have to. Women like us, we come here for different reasons, but the story's always the same. We made ourselves smaller for someone who mistook our quiet for agreement." That landed. She continued, more softly now. "Don't let distance fool you into rewriting the truth. Some men miss you not because they see you clearly, but because they miss the way you used to bend." We worked the rest of the shift in silence, but her words stayed with me. That night, I opened the email again, read it once more, and then deleted it. Because I didn't need Daniel's pride. I had a child's fever that finally broke because of my persistence. A mother who hugged me so tightly I thought I'd break. A team that handed me scalpels without questioning if I deserved to hold one. I had Amina's voice in my ear. "You don't owe anyone the version of you that kept quiet just to keep the peace." Back home, I was tolerated. Here, I was trusted. And trust felt a hell of a lot more like love than silence ever did. It started with a rash, just a few red spots on the arms of 3 children who came in together. Nothing alarming until the fever hit, then the vomiting, then the seizures. Within 24 hours, the camp clinic turned into a battlefield. We dealt with outbreaks before: malaria, dysentery, but this was different, fast, unforgiving, and it didn't care about age, or strength, or hope. Amina didn't leave the tent for 16 hours straight, neither did I. We improvised isolation protocols, rationed antibiotics, and turned tarps into quarantine zones. The local translators helped keep order, their eyes flicking nervously toward their own families. By day 2, half our staff was running fevers. One nurse collapsed mid-injection. I was triaging in the heat with my shirt soaked through, my gloves tearing from overuse. It felt like we were scooping water from a sinking boat with paper cups. Amina started coughing that night. She brushed it off. "Dust," she said. "I've got lungs like leather." By morning, she couldn't stand. I carried her to the back of the supply tent myself, set up an IV, and promised to keep things moving. She grabbed my hand, eyes glassy. "It's yours now." I didn't have time to feel scared. We had more than 30 patients in overflow. Our oxygen supply was down to 3 tanks. I pulled aside 2 field medics, assigned rotations, and told them we were switching to symptoms-based triage. No one questioned me. I worked without stopping. No meals, no breaks. I was using torn gauze to splint fractures and boiling scalpels in rainwater. A 5-year-old coated in my arms. I brought her back. An elderly man died holding my hand. I held on until the end. We lost 10 people in 48 hours. But we saved twice as many. And when the World Health Rep finally arrived by chopper 2 days late, carrying crates of antivirals and relief workers, she found me standing in a blood-stained shirt, barking orders, hands covered in iodine and certainty. "You're in charge?" she asked. "I am," I said, and I didn't flinch. Amina was stable by then, weak but smiling from her cot. She raised a trembling fist when I walked in to check her vitals. "Told you," she whispered, "lungs like leather." I laughed, exhausted, filthy, but more alive than I'd ever been in my life. I wasn't just surviving here. I was becoming. The outbreak had broken, but not without scars. We mourned the ones we lost with a silence deeper than any ceremony. No speeches, no music. Just a row of candles flickering outside the clinic tent, each one marking a life we couldn't save. On a rare lull, I returned to my cot to change and check messages. A bundle of supplies had arrived, wrapped in plastic with some letters from home slipped between. One was from a med school friend, brief, kind, congratulatory. Another was junk. Then I saw it. An email from Evelyn. The subject line was her usual cold efficiency. Thoughts on perspective. I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity, no, not curiosity, old wounds made me click. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. She didn't mention Daniel, didn't talk about the hospital board or her network or who had seen what article about my work here. Instead, it began with a sentence that stopped me cold. I used to think the world didn't need heroes, that it needed structure. I read that line 3 times. She went on, about how control gave her comfort, that the operating room was a place where outcomes were measurable, lives were labeled as saved or lost with clean scalpel lines. That everything outside of it terrified her not because it was dirty, but because it was unpredictable. And then she wrote something I never expected. You exposed something I didn't want to see in myself, that all my structure was just scaffolding for fear. You were never beneath me, Sarah, you were beyond me. And I didn't know how to love you for it. My throat tightened. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. But she was offering something honest. A kind of surrender. I didn't cry, not because it didn't matter, but because the ache inside me finally had a shape. I could hold it, understand it. I walked outside and sat beneath the acacia tree near the perimeter fence. The breeze was dry and light, rustling the canvas of nearby tents. I stared out at the red horizon and felt something shift. Not anger, not victory. Just release. I opened my notebook, the one I carried on shift for sketches and vital signs, and wrote only one thing on a blank page. I see you now. Then I folded the page, tucked it into my pocket, and went back to work. Because the ghosts of our past don't always need exorcism. Sometimes, they just need to be seen. The day Daniel showed up, the air was thick with dust and something else, tension, maybe, or disbelief. He stood at the edge of the landing pad in clean khakis and a linen shirt, looking every bit the outsider. A medical liaison had found me mid-round and said, "There's a man here asking for Dr. Martinez, says he's your husband." I laughed, short, bitter. I hadn't used that word husband in months. When I saw him, my first thought wasn't about love or anger, it was about how pale he looked, not just skin tone presence. He didn't belong here, and for once, he knew it. He smiled weakly. "You look strong." I didn't answer. He followed me toward the supply tent, trying not to stare at the wounds, the flies, the bare-bones triage stations. I could feel him absorbing it all, trying to process what version of me had lived here without him. "I came because we've opened a new trauma wing," he said finally. "Back home, your name came up." I stopped walking. "What?" "They want someone to lead it, someone who's done the work. You'd have full control staffing, policy, outreach." My laugh was dry. "Outreach? That's what Evelyn offered me 6 months ago." He shook his head. "No, this is real. You'd be the face, a partner." I didn't speak. I just stared at him, letting the weight of it sink in. He pulled out a folder. Of course he had a folder full of diagrams, statistics, a glossy vision of what my old life could be with a new shine. "Sarah, I miss you." I flinched. "You miss the version of me that fit," I said. "The one who smiled through your mother's insults and didn't question where the money came from or why I was always an accessory to your ambitions." His voice cracked. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's true." He looked down, then back up. "I'm trying to make it right." And maybe he was. But then a child screamed across the compound. I turned instinctively, scanning the movement. A boy with a gash on his arm, one of our newer arrivals. I took a step toward him. Daniel grabbed my wrist. "Just think about it." I pulled free, walked to the child, crouched, and pressed gauze to the wound. My voice was soft, steady. The boy calmed quickly, trusted me. When I stood, Daniel was still watching, not angry, not even hurt, just realizing. This place, this dust, this blood, it wasn't my exile. It was my choice. And I wasn't coming home, because I already was. That night, a child died in my arms. She was 6. No name on record, just a bracelet number and eyes too old for her face. She came in unconscious, fevered, barely breathing. We worked fast fluids, oxygen, compressions, but her body had already decided. I didn't cry. I sat on the floor after we called time, her still weight burned into my lap, and I waited until her mother arrived. The woman collapsed onto her daughter's body like it was air she'd been denied. I stayed there with them until the sun began to rise. That was the night I understood something I'd been circling for months. It wasn't about the prestige. It wasn't about proving Evelyn wrong or making Daniel see me. It wasn't even about saving lives because some lives can't be saved. It was about being there. Being the last hand someone held, the last voice they heard. Being the line between chaos and mercy, even when mercy meant saying goodbye. Later that morning, I found Daniel sitting outside the staff tent, the folder still clutched like a promise he couldn't let go of. He looked up, hopeful. I sat beside him, not close. "I'm sorry," he said, "about the girl." "She didn't have a chance," I said, "but she didn't die alone." He nodded, eyes glassy. "That's what you do here." I nodded once. He took a breath. "You don't have to stay, you've proven your point." I looked at him, quiet. "This isn't a point, it's a calling." "You really mean that?" "I do." He reached into the folder again, pulled out a printed offer letter, pushed it toward me. "Trauma chief, full control, your name on the wing." I read the words, the salary, the benefits. It was everything I once thought I wanted. But it felt like a museum plaque next to a fire still burning. I looked up at him. "You waited too long." He blinked. "Sarah." I smiled, gentle, final. "My heart's not there anymore." He folded the letter slowly. "I thought this would bring you home." "It did," I said, standing. "Just not in the way you meant." He didn't follow me this time. He just sat there, holding a future I no longer fit into. And I walked back toward the tents, the patients, the dust. The only place I'd ever really belonged. The press arrived in a blur of cameras and heat stroke. A documentary crew from Europe, then a human interest reporter from the States. Someone had seen a photo crouched beside a young boy, blood on my hands, a tired smile on my face, and it went viral. "The silent scalpel," the caption read. I hated it. But I understood why it stuck. They came asking questions with soft voices and wide eyes. How does it feel to save lives like this? What's it like being so far from home? How do you handle the emotional toll? I answered honestly, but not dramatically. These stories weren't about me. They were about the girl with the shattered hip who still danced. The man who lost his leg but taught English under a tree every afternoon. The midwife who had delivered 87 babies and remembered every single one by name. But they still insisted on centering me. They clipped a microphone to my collar. I walked them through the triage station, the makeshift operating room, the tent where we kept the smallest ones warm with hot water bottles and scarves. I showed them the broken, brilliant engine of survival we'd built with spit and tape. Back home, people watched, I knew because the messages poured in. A former classmate, "You're incredible. I always knew you'd be the one who actually mattered." An old attending, "You've reminded us why we started this work." And from Evelyn, just 2 words, "I see you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Even the hospital where I used to work sent out a staff-wide email praising the work I was doing on the front lines of global health. They included a photo of me with a little girl in my lap. My stethoscope draped like a ribbon across her chest. They didn't mention I'd once been passed over for a hospital board seat because I lacked polish. Funny how the world's perception shifts when a camera gets involved. But none of that was why I did it. The real recognition came at sundown, when one of the translator's sons, barely 5, missing 2 front teeth, ran up to me with a crumpled drawing. It was me, holding a giant syringe, smiling. In the corner, he'd written in shaky English, "Dr. Sawa, save my mama." I taped it to the inside of my locker. Not for the cameras. Not for the legacy. For me. Because that was the only kind of spotlight I ever needed. The letter arrived folded in quarters, the edges soft like it had been handled too many times before someone worked up the courage to send it. It was addressed by hand, Evelyn's precise script looping across the envelope like she was still trying to maintain control even in apology. I waited 3 days before opening it. Not out of resentment, out of readiness. When I finally slid the paper free, the handwriting wavered, not shaky, just different, as if she'd stopped being a surgeon for a second and allowed herself to be human. Sarah. I don't know how to begin this, so I won't try to make it perfect. I never did understand you, and I think that frightened me more than I ever admitted. I'm used to precision, to control. You were unpredictable, emotional, brave. I confused your passion with arrogance. I mistook your independence for defiance, and worst of all, I thought that if I could make you feel small, you might finally fit into our family without breaking it. Instead, you broke it open. I stopped reading. The wind outside the tent picked up, rustling the flap, stirring sand through the air like nature was brushing past too quickly to care. I kept reading. You've done what I never had the courage to walk away from the comfort of control to do something real. I mocked your choices because they scared me. Because I knew if I had been braver I might have done the same. I tried to break you before you could leave. And you did leave anyway, not out of spite, but strength. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. Not Daniel's wife. Not the ER girl. You. And I was wrong. No signature. Just the truth. I folded the letter and slid it into the small journal I kept tucked under my cot between a drawing from a child and a photo of a woman I once was, standing stiffly beside Daniel at a gala, smiling through the crack in her soul. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at Evelyn. I didn't feel much at all. Just clarity. Because closure isn't loud. It's quiet. It's paper soft from too much hesitation. It's words that finally admit what silence never could. It's enough. I read Evelyn's letter again under the acacia tree near the perimeter, where the wind always seemed to carry stories instead of sand. It was late afternoon, shadows long, the camp quieter than usual. A rare breath between storms. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger anymore either. I felt something close to peace. The kind that comes not from reconciliation, but from understanding. From seeing someone clearly flaws, fears, and all and no longer needing them to change for your healing to begin. I pulled out my notepad and wrote slowly, deliberately. Evelyn. Thank you for your honesty. I know it cost you more than you'll ever admit, and I believe you meant it. I forgive you. Not because it erases the damage, but because I no longer carry the weight of needing your validation. I found my place. It's not in the rooms where people whisper about titles and board seats. It's not in a marriage that asked me to shrink. It's here among the dust and the noise, the sickness and survival, where purpose lives in every heartbeat I steady. I hope someday you find yours too. Sarah. I sealed the note, handed it to a courier who made the weekly run to the capital, and watched the truck drive away until it disappeared in the horizon. Then I went back to work. A mother was waiting with her newborn in her arms, eyes wide and unsure. A translator helped her sit. The baby had a rattle in his chest, early pneumonia. I listened, examined, prescribed. But before I sent them off, the mother reached out and placed her hand over mine. No words. Just gratitude. Real, simple, wordless. Later, I sat outside the clinic, stethoscope still warm from the last patient, and watched the sun bleed gold across the red earth. I wasn't a symbol, I wasn't anyone's redemption story. I was just a doctor. And finally, that was enough. 1 year later, the camp had changed and so had I. The tents were still here, sun-bleached and patched with new seams. But now they stood alongside a small concrete clinic, solar panels blinking on the roof, fresh paint drying on the side walls. Children ran between clotheslines and water pumps, their laughter louder than the coughing had once been. life, real and messy, pulsed through every corner of this place. We had a refrigerator now. That was a miracle. Vaccines stayed cold, blood could be stored. A generator hummed softly like a heartbeat we'd fought to keep steady. I stood in front of a chalkboard, marker in hand, sweat pooling between my shoulders as I explained how to recognize internal bleeding in trauma. My audience, 5 new volunteers from 3 different countries, scribbled notes, wide-eyed and eager. I remembered that feeling. I carried it still, just steadier now, sharpened. Amina leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching with her usual half-smile. After the session, she handed me a mug of something that might have once been coffee. "New ones look up to you," she said. "I scare them a little," I replied. "Good, fear is healthy, you'll teach them how to use it." We walked the perimeter together, checking on water levels, scanning for signs of new arrivals. Near the southern fence, someone had painted a mural, an enormous hand holding a tiny one. Beneath it, in both French and English, someone had scrawled, "Save one life and you save the world." I stopped and stared. I hadn't noticed it until now. Amina nudged me gently. "Told you, this place remembers who shows up." That night, I sat by the fire pit with the other doctors and nurses, the translators, the cooks. One of the new volunteers had brought a tiny Bluetooth speaker and jazz played softly beneath the stars. Someone passed me a plate of rice and beans, and someone else handed me a letter that had arrived in the latest batch of mail. It was from a former patient, a boy who once screamed every time we touched him. Now, he was back with his family, living in a coastal village. He wrote that he wanted to become a doctor. Said he wanted to save people the way Dr. Sawa did. I folded the letter and tucked it in the pocket of my scrubs. Then I looked around. At the laughter, at the light, at the hands that had learned to work in perfect chaos. I ran my fingers along the stethoscope around my neck. And I smiled. This was home.